Looking to become a mensch?
Welcome to the Mensch Podcast.
What happens when you're 22 years old, newly elected student body president, and 5 days into your first school year? The world changes forever.
For Tessa Veksler, October 7th was the beginning of a fight she never asked for but she never refused to walk away from. The daughter of Soviet Jewish refugees who fled persecution to build a new life in America, Tessa grew up knowing what it meant to carry a Jewish identity in a world that doesn't always welcome it. But nothing could have prepared her for what was coming.
Within weeks of the Hamas massacre, signs appeared across her campus calling her a genocide supporter. Her name was on posters. Warning, you can run but you can't hide. A recall effort was launched to remove her from office. And through it all, Tessa showed up to Senate meetings, to her office, to the camera, and said 3 words that would resonate with Jewish students across the country. We are not going anywhere. Despite massive abuse, defamation, and violent threats against her, Tessa prevailed and beat the recall vote.
Since then, she's been featured in the landmark documentary October 8th. She's been invited to the White House and United Nations and has become one of the most recognizable young Jewish voices in the country. She's also filed a federal lawsuit against UC Santa Barbara for failing to protect her and other Jewish students on campus.
Today, she sits down to talk with us about identity, courage, and what it means to be a young Jewish student on an American college campus right now.
Tessa, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Mensch Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, just to start a little bit into your roots and background. Your parents fled the Soviet Union like many other second generation Jews in the country today because they were persecuted for being Jewish. You grew up in a secular but very proudly Jewish environment. I was just going to ask, what was it like growing up in such a household, and how did you kind of make sense of an identity that your family had to flee to preserve, and what was your relationship with Judaism growing up as a whole?
It's a great question. I think for me, growing up, I knew that I was a Russian speaker long before I understood that I was Jewish. And because I was mainly around Russian-speaking people and Russian-speaking Jews, I assumed that everybody who looked like me and sounded like me and spoke Russian was Jewish. That was my assumption, that there was no difference between me and them. And that difference kind of became more apparent over time. And that's kind of how I started to realize that there was like another piece of my identity as a person that included this Jewish piece. But I grew up going to Hebrew school on Sundays. And so there was a little bit of Judaism kind of woven into my life, but it was never introduced to me in the super religious way, more, I guess, in a cultural way and more as an extracurricular activity in the same way that I would play tennis or play any other type of sport. Going to Hebrew school was an extracurricular for me. So yeah, I grew up not really associating my Jewishness with any type of religion and really anything outside of knowing that that was a part of my identity and ethnic identity. And then like the fact that we didn't celebrate Christmas and we did Hanukkah, but I really didn't observe many of the Jewish holidays. So that was a piece of it. And then kind of it took me a really long time to kind of understand what my parents had fled and why they fled it, because it's kind of a taboo topic. It wasn't really something that my parents brought up to me. It wasn't like this is why we left the Soviet Union. There was anti-Semitism, there was persecution. It really only started to come up when I went to Israel for the first time in high school. And then when I came back and started seeing some anti-Semitism myself, that was the first time I started asking questions. But it took a pretty long time to get that picture out of my family.
I think, thank you. I think that's very cool because it definitely is very relatable. Personally, for me, I'm also the son of Soviet Jewish immigrants and also coming from the Bay Area. I think it's a very kind of common thing where our parents would kind of withhold really what was going on in the Soviet Union. And I know obviously the Bay Area Jews are known for being more secular, kind of not as hardcore, you could say, as the East Coast Jews. So this is, I think, a very like relatable experience, and it's really cool how that one trip to Israel really changed kind of how you saw your Judaism. And I think that happened for a lot of people that went to Israel. And I think it also shows why going to Israel maybe is so important for a lot of young Jews to really open up their horizons and understand Judaism in a sense more than like what you said, it's just an extracurricular, kind of develop that part of their identity.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, building off of that, like I think I also personally am also a Russian, like Slavic Jew, and my parents had, I think, the same experience where they kind of gatekeep that. And going back to your Israel trip, can you maybe describe how that experience changed you as a person and your relationship to Judaism and Zionism as a whole?
Yes, I think it was kind of the first time that I had associated myself with something bigger. I think because, again, our community in the Bay Area was very tight knit and small. I never felt like, oh, I'm a part of this, thousands year long history, or I'm a part of a global community until I went to Israel. So that was one thing, like a connection that you feel that's kind of hard to describe until you go. And I kind of went through a process of like, why do I feel so connected? Like, why am I so emotional going to the Western Wall when it's never meant anything to me my whole life? And so through being there, through meeting other Jews and realizing that I'm a part of this gigantic global family, that definitely redefined what my Jewishness was. And then particularly the program that I was on, I went with NCSY, which is a modern Orthodox youth movement. And it was kind of like, it was an opportunity for me to ask any question that I had without judgment. And I had a lot of questions because, again, I didn't really have a religious foundation to kind of learn from. And I had been only in the Chabad environment and then in a Reform environment. And so I've kind of felt something click for me where I personally really resonated with the modern Orthodox community because I felt like it was traditional and took things as they were written, which made a lot of sense for me. That's kind of the way that I think. But also all of these people had modern lives and were contributing to society. So for me, it was like two things clicked into place. One, that I have a link to Israel, and then I'm inextricably linked to a global Jewish population. And then in Judaism, I finally found a sect of Judaism that I felt like aligned with who I already was as a person. And so that was kind of the launching pad for my Jewish journey that I've been on since then.
I think that's really beautiful because it's really cool to see how like the transformation from kind of your secular childhood environment to really transitioning into that orthodoxy. But the way you put it is less of like a transformation and more of like you kind of just like unlocked it within yourself. Like you always had it in you. It's just you just rediscovered it for the first time per se. And I think that's
Right.
That's very critical. Like I know for me personally, I have sort of a similar kind of outlook. Like I obviously also grew up pretty secular, but then my first trip to Israel, which was the summer before October 7th, really like changed everything for me. Like before, if people would ask me if I'm Jewish, I would just kind of like shrug and be like, oh, I mean, yeah, I guess. But then after that trip to Israel really changed how I saw my own Judaism and really like my connection to it. So I think that's very beautiful. Just going back a little bit to your high school years, you founded your high school's first Jewish student union, which you described as explicitly Zionist, which is pretty ambitious. In a school where most Jewish students stayed quiet, like most schools right now probably, where did that courage come from? Were you nervous doing it initially, or do you think you always kind of had these leadership traits?
I was always a natural leader, but the way that it came off most of the time was as being someone who was bossy. And so it was difficult to kind of understand what being a true leader looked like. And it was almost like, okay, this is something where I feel like I can actually lead because it's something that's related to my identity. It's something that nobody else wants to start. I say this all the time, like to lead is to go first, and everybody wants to lead and nobody wants to go first. So it was kind of my moment to step forward and do something first. And yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was a learning process for me. I had just gotten back from Israel when I started this club. And so there were a few things that kind of drove me to do it. But the courage came from, and I recently posted a video about this, like when I was meeting other people my age in Israel, Israelis who were 17, 18, their next step in life was to go to the IDF. And that was a really like interesting concept for me as an American Jew, because that's not something that I can relate to. And I know like my father had to do mandatory service in the Soviet Union. So this mandatory service piece was kind of like when I first thought about it, like, oh, that's so unfair. And then I was like, okay, well, actually, this is necessary. It's really necessary. And if kids like me are going to Israel and we're kind of reaping all the benefits from visiting the country, then we still have to find a form of service. So I felt like I needed to find a way to serve Israel in my own capacity as an American Jew. So again, I think for me, like when people are putting their lives on the line, then the least that we can do in the diaspora is just to make it abundantly clear where we stand. And I had a lot of moral clarity that I knew that Israel, standing with Israel, and again, like seeing the alignment between Israel and America and Israel's Western values, I had complete moral clarity in that. So for me, I didn't really have a fear associated with it so much, because I guess even at that young of an age, I had a lot of confidence in my beliefs around that specific issue. And I knew that the majority of my peers had never seen what I had seen. So nobody can really argue with your lived experience either. So that was kind of again, the foundation.
Yeah, I think that's like beautiful, especially like I know this experience probably, I think I can tell, really changed you and I think helped you embrace your new identity.
Totally.
And I know it's really probably also difficult to try and bring these new values to maybe people who have not maybe seen them before or maybe don't really know about them and maybe support them, which can maybe be really hard. And doing that, especially during your teenage years, is extremely like impactful. So bridging off of that, you ran for student body president at UCSB, kind of wanting to be a Jewish leader in a non-Jewish space, however. So what did that mean to you? And why did you feel like this would be an important thing?
I mean, I don't think that Jews change the world from within our own echo chamber. And so I always saw as leadership in my Jewish community as a way of kind of filling my own cup. But it wasn't something that I felt was necessarily impacting everyone around me. So I think that there needed to be kind of a balance in my contribution to my community and my contribution to my overall campus. I think that's a Jewish value in general. But I knew that the highest impact that a Jew can have is by doing good in this world and wearing their Judaism on their sleeve at the same time. So that when people see someone doing good and then they associate that with someone who's Jewish, they then consider the Jewish community to be good. And so when I decided to run for student body president and I had won, that was kind of one of my thoughts, one of my many thoughts about running. I ran for a lot of reasons, but one of them specifically relating to your question was, of course, like thinking, okay, how incredible would it be if there was a student body president of a major public university who was Shabbat observant, who was proudly Jewish, who was proudly pro-Israel, and was really supporting and leading this, gigantic public university's campus community. So yeah, I just saw it more. I saw it from a place of impact in both my genuine care to help the people around me, and my desire to lead, but also, of course, the positive impact that it could have on my community and my people, and how people perceive who we are.
I think that's definitely great. Thank you for that. I think, yeah, like you said, the best way to probably break this anti-Jewish stigma maybe in universities or discrimination is to not necessarily just like verbally defend yourself or fight against it, but like be a positive example. If you actually act and do positive things for the community, not in like your own name, but also like in the name of your identity of being Jewish, then people are going to have to associate that with your Jewishness. So I think that's a great strategy.
Totally.
And just wrapping back around to what you said before, I think that also ties into kind of our responsibility as Jews in the diaspora in America. I think that was a great point too, because it shows that not all Jews have necessarily the same responsibility or the same capacity. There's multiple fronts. So while there's like soldiers risking their lives to defend the Jewish people in Israel, we don't necessarily have to fight the military front. We can fight the front on college campuses. Like many of our viewers could go to college campuses and, kind of take some advice from you, or like the social media front, which you're also very active on. there's so many fronts where the Jewish people, are kind of lagging behind in and kind of losing that battle. I think it's very important for them to address it. And a lot of people only think it's kind of like the military part of fighting, but there's so much more to it. So I think that's also very great.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well said.
Thank you. And then, so while you were at UCSB, obviously the tragedy of October 7th happened just 5 days into your first full school year as student body president. Walk us through that first week. What were like the first 48 hours kind of like for you as both a Jewish person and a person running for the student government, and how do you kind of balance those two personas?
You're saying the 48 hours post October 7th?
Yeah.
So because I'm observant, I was offline when October 7th happened. And so I guess the first 24 hours were kind of like trying to understand what was happening from like the position of someone who was offline, and then kind of turning my phone on October 8th and having to process everything that people had already been seeing for a day. So it was very challenging, obviously, as a Jew. And I think all of us were pretty mortified. And obviously, as was I. And the first thing that I did was not even really thinking about the presidency, because, again, my initial reaction when I saw like videos coming out from this day was like, this is like my family being attacked. So I need to say something because this is my family. And so my initial post that I made from like my personal Instagram account was just commenting on that. And then I really only realized like, oh, okay, probably in like the last 24 hours of that 48-hour period, that this would have an impact on my presidency, because I saw how people were starting to comment on that post. And I was pretty taken aback how quickly people were using it against me, especially because at that point, Israel hadn't even responded. We were still counting bodies. There were still terrorists in Israel. So I knew that things were going to change pretty drastically. Obviously, I didn't envision the war going on for as long as it did. I didn't think that students would ever take it to the level that they took it. So, and I really tried, especially in those first 48 hours while I was still processing, I really was in the mindset of separating kind of my statements as like me, Tessa Veksler, like the person, and then me within my role, because there was definitely a pressure to balance my personal views, because when you're representing a 24,000 strong student body every student has diverse opinions on a topic, and you're the leader, people need to feel comfortable approaching you and talking to you about anything and asking you any type of question. And I wasn't trying to alienate any group of people from coming to approach me. So it was a pretty difficult thing to balance, both the grief of October 7th and what that felt like as a Jewish person, and then balancing my responsibility within my role in my community.
Yeah, like I'm noticing kind of how you're always being like vocal, and it's really amazing, like your ability to always stand proud of your identity and be able to put it to the front line of yourself, but also try and like balance it at certain times. Has there ever, however, maybe been a time when you were younger, or any time in your life where it's maybe been hard to be proud of your Jewish identity in a moment due to maybe fear of like any personal harm or just scenario that was really uncomfortable?
A good question. There's been moments where I feared, I don't know if like not being proud. I'm trying, because I've always been confident in being proud of who we are. There's never been a moment where I'm like, oh, I think I shouldn't be, but definitely in like showing outward, like, physical representations of Judaism, whether it was like wearing a necklace or something, if it was like an unsafe environment for me, that's for sure. But I personally never really felt like there would be a major loss for me. And again, I think maybe this is just something that was like just always kind of a part of who I was. I just always really believed that as long as I stayed true to my values and I listened to the opinions of those who I respected, then I shouldn't really worry about the potential losses that might come out of me being who I am. So yes, I guess in terms of safety, there were definitely moments where I had security when I was on campus. But my behavior didn't really change. I wasn't someone who's like went into hiding or ever tried to deny that I was Jewish or pro-Israel. There were just some settings where it was safer for me not to express it as loudly.
Yeah, I think that really shows like the bravery that you had despite all the opposition. So obviously within weeks after October 7th, even as you said, before Israel even responded, before there was even a military response or invasion of Gaza by Israel, signs were all across your office calling you a genocide supporter, saying, quote, "You can run, but you can't hide, Tessa Veksler." You've said that there was kind of a brief moment where you were considering resignation. What pulled you back, and why did you think it was so important that you stayed in your role?
There was a message that would be sent if I stepped down that I thought would be the wrong message. I thought that one, it would be a message to Jews that they should never run for a role like this, and that it's too much for Jews to handle the level of hate that I was receiving. And then to the haters, I mean, I think it's showing them that if you abuse a Jewish person enough, then you'll accomplish your goal. They'll relinquish their identity. They'll give up their role, which like I was democratically elected into. So I think that there was just too much weight, and especially after I posted about it publicly, and there was now kind of like more of a national audience to what was happening to me, it became even more important that there was kind of a message and a symbolism to the role that didn't initially exist when I was first elected, or even maybe right after October 7th. But the more pervasive that this harassment became, the more important it was for me to kind of stick to it. And I was determined to not let these people push me out. And even if they succeeded, that it wouldn't be because I agreed to it at any point.
Yeah, I think that's just amazing how you're able just to you're just power to deal with these situations. And I think almost all Jewish teens need to hopefully just get even like a fraction of this like ability to just stand against this hate and try your best.
The chutzpah that you
yeah.
have.
Thank you. I like that word.
Yeah. So one question I kind of had is like, did you ever question if you were on the wrong side of the fight? And like, kind of how did you keep yourself morally grounded with like such an overwhelming amount of ignorant impression? Because I personally know throughout my time when I even maybe debate individuals on the situations with Israel and all that, I sometimes do kind of question myself when they do, because I think both sides always have a strong points, and I think that does sometimes make me question it, but at the same time, I usually do come back to my consensus that, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think any intelligent and critical thinker should always be questioning and strengthening their viewpoints, and also being unafraid to admit when they maybe don't know something, or when they need to research something, or when their mind changes on something. Like I've shared that in real time on social media, where maybe I thought a certain way and my opinion has changed now because I've spoken to different people and maybe I've read more about things. So your opinions should be evolving. I never question, again, my stance. My general stance is not something that I ever falter on. But when we're talking about like kind of the minutia, the details, of course, I think it's important to not question your beliefs, but of course to question all the facts. Because again, there's people whose personal experiences you can't really question. And if there's someone who's coming to you and giving you a lived experience that maybe creates a little bit of dissonance with your belief system, that's not a bad thing, and it's okay to acknowledge it. So yes, there were definitely moments where I had conversations and I was like, honestly, like they just made a point where I'm not exactly sure if this is accurate, but I admit it in real time, where I say, honestly, you just said something that's really got me thinking, and I'd like to go read a bit more about that, because I'm not exactly sure how to respond, or I'm not exactly sure, or like, can you send me your source? I'd love to take a look at it. So yes and no. Never the general idea of being a Zionist or pro-Israel or supporting Israel's right to defend itself. But I do think that because we're coming from a place of love and support, that's why we critique it. We critique Israel, we critique the actions of Jews because we want to be the best versions of ourselves, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that level of like intellectual humility is really commendable, and I think it also is kind of necessary to gain credibility, especially when you're debating. You know,
Totally.
if you have someone that's kind of just like fleshing out every single, like arguing against every single talking point, even like the minute details, just because they're kind of sticking to this one agenda, it's much harder for someone on the other side to kind of even get pulled a little closer to that viewpoint or understand
Right.
where they're coming from. But if that person, like what you said, your strategy is admit when you don't know something or admit maybe when you're wrong, like this, have at least some sort of intellectual humility where you can kind of balance where that you might not have all the information and you could have some gaps in your knowledge and kind of be open to these new perspectives or information. I think that's a really effective kind of strategy of getting people that you're debating at to respect you more, and you gain more credibility, so eventually you can maybe come to a closer point than where you started.
Totally.
Yeah, and then you also mentioned how you were doing social media and your videos after October 7th. So those videos, they went viral, obviously, with millions and millions of views. I just wanted to ask, you weren't a content creator before October 7th. So what made you decide to go public? Especially you already had a very strong kind of influence as the president. So what made you decide to kind of open up another front per se? And what do you want people watching your videos to feel? And do you think that it's an effective way to kind of exert this leadership?
It's a good question. I think that my answer is not something that most people would expect, but like my first initial post wasn't to influence anyone. It was more like a cry for help because I felt really, really isolated. I had little to no support on campus and kind of was just like, okay, I need to post about this and I want hopefully to reach some people who can help me manage this because I just did not have enough resources. I didn't have the people to back me up. And I think that I didn't have like an agenda in mind. And I definitely did not think that it was going to go viral or like become what it ended up becoming. That wasn't really my plan or my goal. But now, obviously, that I have a platform, I think anybody who gets a platform, I think, has a responsibility to use it and use it responsibly. So I've kind of taken it on because it naturally progressed that way. And in terms of the videos that I make, I'm really trying to be kind of like this sane center voice on social media. If people are looking for reaction videos to things that are horrible, I'm not the account for them to follow. Like, I'm really trying to contribute meaningfully to the conversation and provide like my unique position on things, and my unique voice. And so that's kind of what the page has become. I just kind of want people to maybe see themselves in me. I think a lot of people post October 7th in the Jewish world feel pretty politically homeless right now. We feel kind of denied by every political party. And so I feel like almost my page kind of represents what that feeling is like, let's evaluate everything we're hearing and come up with a moderate view and actionable kind of give people calls to action that they can actually fulfill. I just think a lot of what I see online right now is like riling people up unnecessarily, capitalizing on people's emotions. Like, Jews are already upset and they're scared and they're angry. Like, you don't need Jewish influencers going online and making you more upset and more angry and more afraid. A leader's job is, again, I say this all the time, validate the emotions of your community, and relate to them, but also give people a clear way forward, a path forward. So that's kind of what my platform has become. And I think it'll continue to evolve beyond just the Jewish sphere and the Israel sphere. That's the goal anyway. But
No, yeah, I actually like really love that. I think it's beautiful how it like started kind of
thank you.
accidentally, but it blossomed into something so impactful. So I think that's kind of similar to what we're trying to do with our podcast, where we are trying to like for our target audience, talk to teenagers entering college maybe in that environment where they're gonna have a lot of issues, and especially if they're Jewish identity, they're gonna have a lot of like stress maybe and have to maybe hide it. But we're trying to help them be proud of their identity. And like I just wanted to also go back to maybe something you said before of being the best versions of ourselves we can, like the best Jewish version of ourselves that we can be. I think that's personally kind of one of my biggest life mottos. I think just try and be your best person and do the best things that you can do. And I think that's one of the best ways to live in life. And I thought that was beautiful. So kind of for like segueing for like a Jewish teen like ourselves, what do you think the best way that we can prepare ourselves for the future and continue fighting on campuses?
It's a great question. I've been doing a lot of like teen workshops and teen summits, and I think it's gonna like be a little bit cheesy, but like this is what I always say. I give teens like this 3 Ps thing, which is like what I live by and what I think everyone should live by. So the first of the 3 Ps is your pride. And how do you invest in your pride? You invest in your pride by filling your Jewish cup. You can't go out there and advocate if you're not doing things also to maintain your sense of identity, your sense of community, your sense of having people to back you up, because it's already really scary to lead, and it's even more scarier to lead as a Jew. So that's the first thing, like find your way, one, now as a teen, but also remember when you get to campus that that should be a priority for you to find your Jewish community, to find a way to stay involved in Jewish spaces in whatever way that resonates with you. The second piece is preparedness. The worst thing that could happen when you get to a college campus as a Jew is to have somebody curious about your identity or your views and for you to have nothing to say because you kind of miss your moment. And so it's important to read up on those things now when you're a teen and when you're in high school before you get to that campus environment. And so that means reading the right books. It means getting your news from the right sources. If anyone that's listening wants to go on my Instagram page, I have like linked in my bio, I have a book list of like Israel related books that I think everyone should read, but especially teens should read before going to campus. And then the third of the P's is your power. And that's kind of the Jewishness that you put out there. So it's half of advocacy, like I mentioned, is going and saying the right thing, which comes from the preparedness where you know the facts. But then the other half is just kind of walking around and being proudly who you are. And showing that we are a powerful nation. We're people who are proud of what we've accomplished and what we have to offer to this world. And just do good with your Jewishness on your sleeve, and for people to know that you're Jewish when you're contributing. I think that's the most important thing. So those are my 3 Ps.
Thank you. I think that's very sage advice that our viewers can kind of take away, like
Thank you.
a three-legged stool analogy per se. Like you need all three of them to enter the college campus, and without one you could falter. And I think all three of those are very important components. And I think also if we all collectively have these kind of traits when Jewish teenagers are entering college campuses, we're going to mutually benefit each other, and we're going to be stronger together in an environment where all Jews have these attributes. It's going to be much harder for anti-Semitism and discrimination to ripple through college, because they're going to see how strong the Jewish community is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And on the other side of that perspective, kind of Jewish strength and outward defense, maybe you could say, is like the more kind of timid and shy Jews that I'm sure a lot of us know. So, for example, you've spoken to many parents, you've said, who don't want their kids to be frontline advocates, which is very understandable. I think a lot of Jewish parents are probably like that and have similar worries. you've also said that you've always walked to the beat of your own drum, per se. How do you balance this reality that not every Jewish teen has your confidence or your leadership skills or your family's eventual support? What do you say to that like young Jewish teenager who's kind of still in their own shell, or whose family is worried about their advocacy? How do you kind of balance these two things out?
It's a great question. I think I don't think that the message is that you have to be like me in order to be an advocate, or that you have to possess like the desire to go and be the student body president. There's a reason there's only one, and it's because not everybody can do it or wants to do it, and that's totally fine. The idea is that you don't get to take a back seat and not participate. And the idea that this isn't your problem is one that people need to get rid of. Like, again, what happened to me could have happened to any Jew in my position. It didn't happen to me because I was Tessa Veksler. It happened to me because of my belief system and my identity, which hundreds of kids on my campus shared. And those hundreds of kids should have seen it as their responsibility to stand at bare minimum behind me and ideally beside me. And so I think that that's the first thing to get across. And like, maybe it's a bit of a tough love approach, but I really think it's important. Like, this is important. And just because you don't think it's your problem, or you see other people that are handling it for you, doesn't mean that you have the right to take a back seat. Because at the end of the day, if Jews are targeted, you're included in that category, and your future children will be, and your future grandchildren will be. So that sense of responsibility is one. And then the sense that there's different ways of leading, right? I always say this too, like a person who's running for office is nothing without their campaign team. And nobody remembers the campaign team. Nobody remembers who handled my marketing or my social media, or who went door to door asking for people to vote for me. Nobody remembers those people's names, but those people were critical to me winning. So if you don't want to be the person who's elected into office, then go help somebody who you think would be great for that position win. There's so many ways to contribute to this that are not necessarily like, they don't require you to be the loudest person in the room or the most outspoken person in the room. In terms of like feeling confident to talk about this issue, confidence comes from knowledge. Knowledge is power. So I didn't always feel this confident talking about this. It comes from a genuine effort. You have to go, you have to read about your topic, you have to become educated on your topic, and it's a never-ending process. And in terms of the family support, you try to find support in other places. And you also, again, it's important to respect your parents and respect your family. And I found kind of my balance with doing what I knew I had to do, and also respecting my parents' boundaries and kind of what they were okay with. But you're not always going to have a huge support system. You have to learn how to support yourself, and try to lean on other people who might not necessarily be your relatives, whether it's friends, whether it's teachers, whether it's your peers, whether it's a coach, teammate, whatever it is. You'll find other people to lean on. But again, I think that it's just like, we cannot be the broken link in this chain. Like, there's been thousands of years of our relatives really fighting for us, and it's equally our responsibility, if not even more so, because we have more of a Jewish infrastructure than they ever had, to go and to defend ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think any Jewish teen listening could really learn from this and try and take this to heart, because I personally know a lot of Jewish teens who kind of don't know where to get started in the community and ask you sometimes, oh, what can I do? And I personally don't know always what to tell them, but I'm just like, go do something, put yourself out there. And I think going also back to UCSB and the trend there, what happened to you wasn't unique. It happened everywhere, but you just stepped up to your role. You stepped up and just became vocal. So I wanted to ask, do you think what happened to you is a symptom of something systemic across higher education? And if so, does this trend worry you? And kind of like, how do you see the future of academia in relation to Jews playing out?
Okay, multi-part question. So I'll try to hit it piece by piece. I think the first thing is, yes, it is a systemic issue in higher academia, because There's a few reasons, but one of those reasons is that a lot of our universities accept money from our greatest foreign adversaries who don't share our values and are in fact are trying to influence both professors and students and administrators on these campuses to teach and kind of push a specific narrative, which includes the anti-Israel narrative, the anti-West narrative more largely. So yes, there's an anti-Western push that's coming monetarily from some of these countries like Iran and Qatar that are giving to these universities. So that's one. That's why there is absolutely a trend. Where do I see it going? I think it depends on a few things. I think it depends on ensuring that there continues to be a strong pro-Israel and Jewish presence on these campuses, even when it's hard. I think it's important that Jews keep going to Columbia, Jews keep going to UC Santa Barbara. It's important that we maintain a presence. And two, obviously, how willing we are to continue to call it out and continue to be active on campus. And then there's kind of this like top-down approach that needs to happen, which is maybe more government regulations on the foreign funding that's accepted. And so there's a few pieces kind of in play, and I don't really know. My hope is that eventually we'll be able to turn this train around. It's just going to be a pretty long process, and we kind of have to accept that this is going to take a really, really long time to reverse, because it's kind of been in the works for almost 30 years, if not more. And so to reverse 30 years of damage and money that's been funneled into these universities, it's really going to take some time. So my hope is that it becomes better, but I do think, and again, it also really depends on what's happening in the region. So if things escalate in Israel, usually things escalate on college campuses in America. So it really depends. It's partially up to us, and partially up to our government and the people in power. So
yeah, it's definitely a lot to take in. I think, like as you said, one of the like key points that I want to emphasize is that this change didn't happen overnight, where people on college campuses just saw like the war and they decided to all like organize together. It was a multi-decade and kind of planned and targeted, you could say, approach from like different adversaries, as you said, like Qatar and Iran. And so it's not just like the students, but it's also infiltrated like the actual professors and the universities oftentimes. So it's kind of like a multi-headed monster that we have to kind of fight, because all of these students are getting their information and they're accessing all these viewpoints through somewhere. And obviously when they, group together and think about their ideas together, it creates also this state of like group polarization. So they kind of leech off each other's opinions. And so I think that's definitely one of the most important issues that the Jewish community has to combat for the future. Going towards more like personal experience for me, and Robbie also probably, in our school and in many high schools and college campuses around the country, especially since October 7th, obviously there's been a massive surge in anti-Semitism everywhere, but in many ways it's become harder to detect or call out, because this new anti-Semitism has kind of been masked behind, anti-Zionism, or in my case, in my high school, oftentimes, it's just the anti-Semitism has become so normalized and sugar-coated in a way. So, for example, there could be a stereotype about a Jewish joke or something trending online, and a lot of people who I know don't have, bad intentions, who obviously aren't anti-Semitic, who are, they don't have anything against Jews, but they see this rhetoric online and they see that all their friends are saying it, so they begin saying that, and then that leads to like a cycle of, repetition and normalization, and then they also internalize it. So does this new kind of morphing of anti-Semitism worry you? And how do you combat something like this? Because I don't think this has ever kind of been a reality in the history of Jew hatred. And it's so quickly denied, but it's such a like blatant attack on Jewish identity. So what would you say to that?
it is hard because I think people are often disguising their anti-Semitism under something else, but that's not really a new concept. I think we just have different iterations of anti-Semitism in each generation. And I always call like anti-Zionism the fourth iteration of anti-Semitism, because I think it's just kind of a new way for people to express their Jew hatred. And a lot of it is kind of showing how, there's a double standard that's placed on us, that we're demonized. There's the 3D method is what I'm thinking of, the double standards, delegitimization and demonization of Israel, which becomes anti-Semitism. But it really applies to us as Jews and how we're spoken about and how we're treated. So it worries me, but kind of the template that's being used isn't necessarily new. It's just that they've become more effective at masking it. And so the only thing we can do is do our best to try to unmask it and show it for what it is, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. So transitioning a bit also into your movie, for anyone that hasn't heard of it, it's called October 8th, and I think all of our listeners should go watch it. It's about, like, in real time, the experiences that many different leaders on college campuses, such as yourself, had, and how they combated all these, encampments and college protests, and how that actually played out. So we were just wondering, can you walk us through maybe how you were approached for October 8th, and what was your initial reaction when the project came together, and maybe your feelings when the film was actually released?
Yeah, I was approached for the project by first Deborah Messing, who's an actress. She's amazing. So she discovered my page and saw some of my videos, which she then shared with Wendy Sachs, our incredible director. And so Wendy contacted me and asked me if I had availability to film. I didn't really know kind of what the project was or how big it would actually end up being. I agreed to the interview. I happened to be in New York, and that's where I recorded my sit down. And after that interview, Wendy was like, okay, like, your story is definitely going to be in the film. Let's continue to do more filming. So she ended up coming to UCSB, and we ended up filming there. But yeah, it was pretty remarkable. I saw the film for the first time at the LA premiere of it, and was definitely very touched and surprised at how much my story was kind of a central theme throughout the film, and how prominently Wendy chose to kind of display it. So that was great. And I was just really, really proud to be a part of a project like this. And I thought it gave, it really made my story known by so many people. And the film was a huge success in theaters, much more successful than we thought. It ended up staying for a while. I've been really privileged to travel everywhere with the film and do screenings for the film. So it's been pretty incredible and like humbling, and just a really beautiful experience watching people kind of see my story play out they're seeing it for the first time, and watching it through their eyes has continued to be a very, very special and surreal experience.
Yeah, I personally saw the film on October 8th, and it was like one of my favorite films. I think it was really insightful about what happened and what transpired after the event. But kind of segueing from that, you grew up in a secular home, as you mentioned, and became Shabbat observant. So how did that kind of help you maybe with your relationship in Jewish practices, and how maybe did that help you after October 7th and the years following it?
You're saying how did my observance help me? How did my observance help me? The new observance. I think Shabbat, like God knew what he was doing when he made Shabbat. I think I'm definitely someone who is kind of constantly on and working all the time. And it was like a necessary log off, especially after October 7th. Like, I definitely was obsessed with scrolling social media all the time. And reading way too much of like the horrible things that people were saying. And so I always say, like, I think Shabbat kind of saved me in a lot of ways, because it would prevent me from reading all the things, and it would remind me like that I really shouldn't be reading any of that to begin with. It wasn't really healthy. But there's a lot of things. I really believe that Judaism is kind of the underlying guide to how I speak, how I carry myself, my morals, my ethics, how I make decisions. So again, it's kind of like my guide, my guidebook to life is my Judaism, and I fall back on all of these things that help me kind of disconnect to reconnect with my community especially because of the career that I'm in and the topics that I focus on being so heavy.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's amazing how you have that kind of base that you can kind of fall back on, and that gives you your strength. And I think a lot of, if not all people, need something like that to kind of propel them to kind of get their strength from. And I think for you, that's definitely your Judaism and your Shabbat observance. And I think that's a very powerful thing. Looking forward to the future a little bit. You were invited to the White House and the United Nations after your story broke out. You've been featured in a documentary now, and you've spoken in front of thousands of people at only 24 years old. What does the next chapter look like for you? Do you see yourself working in conjunction with Jewish causes throughout your career?
I think that I don't see myself only working in the Jewish world. I think that this will continue to kind of evolve and branch out, and I'm already kind of doing that. The focus is more now on like the same center of politics and being more of a bridge builder. Although I don't like using this term, but I was a little bit pigeonholed into the Israel and Jewish space. And not that it's a bad thing. It's been like my pride and my honor to do it, and I will continue to do it. But it was never kind of my goal. And again, like going back to the origin story of becoming president, like you don't make change from within the echo chamber. And so I think the most powerful thing I can do as a proud Jew is to go and try to make change in the world for the greater good. So I think that it will continue to evolve. I think it will continue to expand. Obviously, we'll always be involved in Jewish causes and support Jewish causes and continue to talk to Jewish communities and Jewish teens. But it will be hopefully under a broader umbrella. And I'm still working on that. And I hope to have a few projects come out in the next year or two that kind of exemplify what I'm talking about with that broader lens.
Okay. So for our final question, we were just wondering if every teen listening to this walked away with one thing or maybe one piece of advice, what would your piece of advice be?
It's a good question. Listen, I think being Jewish and being proudly Jewish was never supposed to be a liability. And it's unfortunate that it's turned out that way. And I think I don't ever want to invalidate the feeling of fear or discomfort around being proudly who we are, because any normal person who would see what we're going through would have that reaction. And so for every teen listening, I really understand where your fear is coming from, but understand that fear is a really powerful emotion that can either shape you or break you. And so you can let fear kind of crush who you are and crush your sense of identity, or you can channel that fear into action. It should light a fire under you to go, and because we have the power to kind of resolve that. So let that emotion and let your powerful negative emotions be something that you validate. And again, you can turn to your community to support you. But ultimately, let it be a driver for the action that we have to take to ensure that future Jewish generations don't have to go through this.
That's amazing advice. I think all of our viewers definitely got at least a few things to take out of your story and your advice. I know I definitely did. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. We'll be definitely looking forward to seeing your new projects in the next couple of years. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Of course, it's my pleasure. You guys are amazing, and I'm excited to hear the episode.